Okay, I believe we are now recording. The recording has started. The recording's not going to go anywhere exciting. It's just going to go on our YouTube channel, our Care Research YouTube channel. Thank you for coming today. It's going to be an interesting one today. The plan is for us to go until about 1 o'clock. If we end a little bit earlier, great. We will make sure we're done by 1, as I know that everyone's on their lunch break and doing all sorts of things. We've got over 50 people on this call, which is fantastic. And I think really, as it's been with many of our webinars, it just shows that there's a bit of a need, a bit of an information gap. I know that we haven't done one of these literally for months. This is simply because I've been doing our CQC training pretty much 3 or 4 days a week, every week for the last 3 or 4 months. We are now the other side of a lot of that, so we're hoping these Wednesday webinars can become much more frequent. We may do one next week, depending on if there's appetite. I'm aware that it's Easter and people might be, I don't know, sitting on a beach in Spain having a lovely time. But if people do want, we can do some more of these webinars in the coming weeks. Anne, it's so lovely to have you. Anne, we've kept Anne's camera off and details just, for her own protection. Not that it's particularly, terrifying. Anne recently went through an inspection under the new assessment. Now, obviously, every inspection is different. There's going to be different people, different stuff. So we can't say that Anne's experience is exactly the exact moment for moment, blow by blow, second for second experience that you will have. But Anne is one of those small numbers of people that does know what it's like to be assessed under this framework. And so we're going to ask Anne some questions. If you have questions, please do put them in the chat. This is not some kind of super mega grilling. This is more about just giving Anne the opportunity to kind of talk through her experiences. I've got a few questions that I'll be asking that we've already pre-discussed and pre-agreed. And if you do have some additional questions, then please do put those in the chat. And if we get time, that'd be really useful. Anne, thank you for giving up your time. Thank you for giving up your Wednesday lunchtime. I know how important lunch breaks are, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
First little question, Anne.
Yeah.
When did you know that you were being assessed? Did you get weeks and weeks of notice? Did you get a phone call? In your experience, when did you know, right, we're being assessed now? What was that process?
When the doorbell rang, basically.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
wasn't told at all. No prior warning. I actually spoke to my inspector the day before. I've been trying to contact her for some time over certain things, and she rang and apologized that she'd not contacted me, and I was just asking her a few questions. I also asked her about the new framework, but not once, she didn't give me any clue at all that I would be inspected the following morning at 9 o'clock.
Wow. So, I mean, 10 out of 10 for acting skills. She should probably, go to RADA. But I don't think, Anne, that your experience is necessarily what everyone experiences. I've heard some people that have got a phone call beforehand, but in your experience, you were at work, you opened the door, and there was the inspector, which I know is, it's not unusual, but nor is it always the way. We've spoken to a couple of services who have been given a phone call the day before and have been given a little bit of notice. So inspector turns up. That that it's under the new framework, because it was kind of 20-something of February, wasn't it? It was kind of the latter end of February. And this is a residential service, so everything is going on as normal within the service. When did they tell you, right, we're looking at it in the new framework, these are the quality statements? Did you know that straight away, or did you have to kind of second guess the quality statements they were looking at?
The first thing I did do when it was one person that came to the door, explained who he was, and the first thing I did say is, are you inspecting on risk, or is this routine? Because we've not had one for so long. He told me it was a routine inspection. He didn't tell me then that it was under the new framework. It probably when we was discussing, because obviously I took him into a quiet area and said, right, okay, so what's happening today? What is it that you want? And that's when he said to me, it is being assessed under the new framework.
Okay. And obviously, one of the main parts of the framework, we've got these 34 quality statements. The Chloe prompts are in the bin. We've talked about that for ages. How many Chloe prompts? Because I know there's been a lot of range. I know one service got looked at with one quality prompt, a quality statement. Another service I know was looked at, I think, about 13 quality statements. How many were you looked at, and when did they tell you what specific ones they were?
So there was 5 quality statements that they looked at. And he basically told me in the initial chat that we had, and then yeah, that was it really. He just said which ones there was, and then obviously as the inspection went through the day, he wanted the evidence, you know, to for that statement really.
And
Yeah.
we spoke about it earlier, and I remember you mentioned there were the five quality statements, and they were the ones that we'd identified elsewhere as kind of what they call priority quality statements,
Yeah.
involving people to manage risks, which is part of safe, safeguarding, which is in safe, safe and effective staffing, which is in safe, involving, and then we also got independence, choice, and control. And there was one other one as well. So have you got them in front of you? The five that you were asked about? Do you recall?
The equality and in experiences and outcomes.
Of course, and the quality and experiences and outcomes. So those were
Yeah.
the five quality statements that we asked. Someone's mentioned the chat. You know, I'm guessing they're now all under the new framework. Yes, you're right. They are now. It's now assumed that they are all under the new framework. There are still, because this was quite early in February, it was just kind of made clear because, you know, it was still a bit of a transition period. But yes, they will now be under the new framework. Any assessment you have within England, obviously in Wales and Scotland, they have their own thing going. So you've got your five quality statements they're looking at. In terms of what they're doing next, one of the things that we've heard a lot of is they're being asked for staff contact details. It's not the same as just bumping into a staff member in the corridor. Did they ask you for staff contact details? Did you have to get permission, or what was the process in terms of staff requesting contact details? Sorry, CQC requesting contact details.
Yeah, so they did. They asked for staff contact details and also residents' families' details. They said that the staff contact details we didn't have to get permission for, but we did for the families, and they wanted them by the end of the day.
Okay.
So yeah, we sent them password protected, and I've got to admit, because obviously it was very short notice, that the staff didn't know that CQC was going to call them, and I did have that feedback from CQC that they said that some people were surprised, but you can only do so much in a day. Yeah,
I think a really interesting point that you raised there is that CQC have stated that you don't need permission for staff contacts, and perhaps that's fair, perhaps that's not. I was speaking to a quality team for a very, very large company who said, you know, I think that's a very grey area. You know, CQC going, hey, can you please send me all the personal phone numbers? 99.9% of care staff do not have a work mobile. It is their personal mobile. But anyway, we play the game. We do what's being asked. I mean, one thing we've been suggesting is that people gain permissions and preferences. Doesn't mean that CQC are going to listen to them. Doesn't mean that you can necessarily not share details. But I think if you can at least do a little bit, you know, if staff can start to get into that head mindset of, you know, how do I want to speak to CQC? What details am I happy to share? Doesn't mean that CQC are necessarily going to listen to it. But I think it's a really important point that CQC are asking for contact details. And so you sent them the phone numbers. And obviously, it was a bit of a surprise for some of those staff because evidently it's not something they're used to. How many people did they contact? Because obviously, in Vegas, I think you said kind of circa 70, 80 staff members. But how many did they actually speak to in your experience in the end?
Well, to be honest, the majority of staff they spoke to, all their surnames ended in B. For some reason.
Okay.
And I think it was probably about maximum 10 people. But then there might be other people that's not disclosed to me that they've been spoken to. So, yeah.
So out of that 70, we're talking somewhere around 10. So if again, just to let you know, services, you know, that feedback from staff and leaders score is going to come predominantly from those 10 people they've spoken to, and that's 10 out of 70. You know, that's a bit of an interesting game to play. I think a really important point there as well is the fact that they phoned people with the surname beginning with B. Evidently, the CQC inspector just kind of opened a bit of that document and right, I'll just call those lot. And I think that's a really interesting one to kind of see that just because you send a full list doesn't mean they're going to get through to all of them, which again highlights that importance of doing feedback yourself, because maybe a whole bunch of people that were in the A's or the C's or the D's might have had really great stuff to say that CQC aren't going to have picked up on because they only called the B's on that particular evening. Really helpful. I mean, some other things, people are raising a few points here. Just in terms of, so Diane asked a really good question. Was the inspector the relationship manager? Did you talk about this person you spoke on the phone? Was that the person that turned up at the door, or were they different people?
No, it was two inspectors, one working remotely and one face to face, and that's
Right.
what the inspector said that they would be doing now.
Brilliant. And about the remote, that really ties in next to Andy's question. Andy said, Anne, have you been asked to provide any supplementary information, so additional information to your inspector? If so, have you got access to your CQC portal, or have you had issues with using the portal to send extra information? So what happened with the information you had to send after that inspection visit? How did you do that? Did you use the portal?
Okay, so the portal, no, I didn't. It's funny you should say that, because I had an invitation to the portal like literally the beginning of February. Couldn't get on it.
So before the inspection.
I spoke to my inspector about it. She says, "Oh, don't worry about it. They are having some problems. They're doing a mop-up of people at the end of March." I said, "Fine, okay." I didn't have to submit anything through the portal. I did have to submit matrix, complaints, quality audits, and things like that to them, but it was via an email that the inspector that was working remotely sent to me. It all got to go via that email. If I sent it to the portal or anything else, it would get lost.
So essentially what we're saying is that, and again, we're all in the midst of portal chaos. It's fun to not fun to watch, but it's an ongoing challenge. So in view of that, they gave you a bespoke specific email address and said, send it here. Okay, yeah. So it was all kind of standard email. You've got the email address you send it to, job done. Out of interest, we'll go into the specific things you shared and talk about that in a short moment. Did they give much of a time limit? So obviously we've got 5 quality statements, a load of extra information. They've just turned up that day. In the old framework, you'd have to get it all there then. But what timescale did they give you to send stuff through to that email address?
Okay, so phone numbers and some care plan stuff was the same day. In fact, the same day I had to give full access to our PCS system, which has got all the care plans, risk assessment. I had to give full access that morning to them. Wow. So the inspector was working on that straight away. The other stuff like the phone numbers and things was the same day, and I did go back and have a look. I know I said to you yesterday it was just one day, but then I was able to send policies and procedures by the end of the following day.
Right, and so you had a couple of days.
Yeah, and they have asked for things since, not masses, but they'll just ring me if they need anything. I've not heard for a while, and I just submit whatever they want, really.
So the way that I would kind of to use that as a picture is it's not like a drawbridge where it comes down and that's it. What you've sent is sent, and if things are missing, it's punishment time. Instead, they've given you these couple of days, you sent things, but then if they've realised a week later, oh, wait a sec, we probably need to look at that, or actually they haven't included enough on that, they've come back to you and said, can you submit that and send that through?
That's right.
And again, correlates with some discussions we've had with other services who've said actually they've had 3 or 4 weeks sometimes of the odd drop in of, oh, could you send a little bit of this through and could you send a little bit of that through? So I think that's very standard. A few other comments that I want to have, before we jump on some of the other questions that had been asked. I just want to know, in terms of speaking with residents' families, what was that like? Because we've spoken about the staff and they kind of said, give us the numbers, and you kind of had no choice, allegedly, and gave them the numbers. Residents and families and those you support, a bit different. What was the process there? And, you know, any idea on what they did with what you sent through?
So we rang the families first. While the inspector was on site, we rang the families and asked if we if they gave permission. Some did, some didn't. And with that, we sent protected password folder over to CQC, and then they had it from there.
And do you know if they called many people or what they did? You know, did they send emails, phone calls, anything like that?
I mean, I know that they've spoken to 3 or 4 family members, but again, there could be more. It depends, you know, how often you see a family member, or if they want to disclose that they have been spoken to, you know. But yeah, I've had family members say, "Oh, CQC rang me," and
okay.
And then the questions that they asked, basically, you know, is your mum happy? You know, oh, do you feel like your mum can complain? Do you feel like you can complain? Them kind of things, really. There was a lot of stuff on complaints, both with
Okay.
residents and staff. It was very, you know.
Which I suppose would link to some of those quality statements
Yeah.
involving people to manage risks, safeguarding, safe and effective
Yeah.
staffing. So it makes sense that those would be areas, and perhaps if they were different quality statements, they might ask some different questions. But yeah, it makes sense that they would go down that avenue, I suppose. Really helpful. A couple of questions that I got from LinkedIn when I asked people. What percentage of time did the assessor spend looking at documents as opposed to kind of observing staff? And again, don't need the exact percentage, but vaguely speaking, how much time do you feel the assessor did looking at documents and screens versus kind of observing staff and talking with people?
Okay, so I would say, I mean, he came at 9 o'clock and he left about 4:30 in the afternoon. So I would say probably half a day on documents and then half a day on staff and residents. And he observed meal times and things like that as well. He wanted to observe specific times. He wanted to know if there were specific residents that he could talk to if anyone was going to get distressed. However, when I did give certain residents' names, after that, they were certain care plans that they wanted to look at. So you know, I don't know whether there's, I don't know. Yeah.
You don't know, but if they spoke to some people, and then that led them to look at some of their care plans in view of the conversation, or maybe just in view of something that they thought in relation to that. So I think what's interesting there is, sorry, yeah,
that was on the day. Obviously, the other inspector had got access to the full PCS system anyway, so she could access any care plans.
And I think that's a really interesting distinction. Under the old framework, you had this kind of mega inspection day or two. And sometimes I'd spoken to service managers who said, the inspector basically sat in the office eating donuts for most of the day, looking at stuff. And it sounds like that actually there was a lot more in-person conversation. There was a lot more care observation. Maybe not 100%. There was still some documentation checking and so on. But it wasn't just that. And actually, a lot of the stuff that perhaps in the old framework they would have assessed there, they're doing separately through the documents you send separately through the access to PCS, which I think is quite an interesting distinction. Another question that I got asked that I think was a really important one. See if I can find it. Here we go. What was the best thing that you got from it, and what would you want them to change? This was from, I won't say their name, but they're a very esteemed and well-known consultant and good friend of mine. And the question they wanted to ask was, what did you get from this? What was the best bits? And is there anything that you would want changing, having gone through, version 1 of the new framework?
I think the only thing that I would say, I mean, I don't know what I would say the best bits are really. I mean, it was a learning curve. It was a learning curve, wasn't it? It's the first inspection it was the first inspection for them inspectors.
Right, so everyone learned
one as well. So I mean, they said that it wouldn't change ratings. It goes on a point system. So we obviously don't know what that is yet. I suppose the one good thing about it is we will be able to view everything on the portal. So we'll be able to view what the points are and how we get to the next stage of whatever we need to get to. So that's a good thing. And the other thing I would definitely say is, I mean, the morning he appeared at the door, and I'd had the phone call the day before, and on that morning I had an email sent to me saying you're going to be inspected, blah blah blah. I mean, I don't see why now that they really need to turn up unannounced if it's routine. Because it makes no sense anymore. It's a different way of inspecting, and they do a lot of it off site. So I don't see what the point of that is really. I don't know.
No, it's a fair point. So what you're saying is that, under the old inspection, it was all or nothing, do or die, mega performance day. And under that environment, it does make sense to go kind of surprise. Whereas if we're doing something that's a little bit more gradual, a little bit of a mixed methods with some observation, some document assessing, perhaps, maybe not everyone agrees, people have different views on this, but perhaps they don't necessarily need to do the kind of unannounced aspect as religiously. And I know of some people who've been assessed on the new framework who haven't had it unannounced. I think the point you made about the scores is really important. I just want to jump in on that. Those of you that have seen some of our previous webinars, those of you that have had our training days, you'll understand kind of the way that the evidence category scores create the quality statement scores, the quality statement scores create the key question scores create your final ratings. because services are being inspected with just a few quality statements, if we look at Anne's example of those 5, it's highly unlikely that their ratings will change in any of those key questions, because only 3 from safe, I think 1 from caring and 1 from responsive, is going to actually change. And what many people have said about this is that this is really kind of going, you haven't got what I call the ugly duckling, beautiful swan experience. Under the old framework, so you could turn up one day, you're an RI, they have a look, and then magically overnight, you become good or outstanding even. That's not going to happen anymore, because unless they assess 15, 20 plus quality statements across the right key questions, it's unlikely that in one hit, you're going to nudge things enough to get to a good or outstanding kind of overnight from somewhere like an RI. So we need to think of it as less about, back in my day, we did GCSEs and we did, you studied geography for 2 years, and then one Thursday afternoon, you did one geography exam, and that was your grade. That's what the CQC framework was like. In the new framework, it's like coursework. You are building your scores. You are building your scores in those quality statements. You are replacing those old scores that come from your previous inspections with new scores as they assess new quality statements. And so that push from good to outstanding or RI to good or anywhere across those spectrums are going to take time. It is really important, number one, in terms of KPIs. If you've got a service that's currently RI, you cannot put an expectation on them to be good by next year, because unless they get inspected in 17, 18 quality statements, it's unlikely it's going to nudge. Secondly, it also places kind of a bit of a responsibility on us to kind of think through, right, what are our expectations around growth? How can we ensure consistent growth? This is not going to be, right, if we put all of our eggs in this inspection day basket, we'll be able to tip the scale. We're going to have to be a bit smarter and work a bit harder to keep things in place so that as we are asked to send evidence, as we have inspections, as we have remote assessments, we build and build and build until those quality statement scores start to nudge us into the next rating band, whether that be from RI to good, from good to outstanding, wherever you are. So I think it's a really important point to highlight. This is a slow burn approach, and that is annoying. It's annoying because we like things to go quickly, and many of you have done lots of amazing changes and you want to show them now. Unfortunately, that just isn't where things are going for the moment. James Bullion of CQC was very open and said, we want this to be more responsive, but it won't be responsive on day one. So I directly said, will people be able to submit evidence when they want, as they want? And James Bullion's answer was, not yet. It's where we want to get to. Certainly if something's been assessed and it's not gone in the right direction, you want to get it reassessed, but we're not there now. Sorry, I just went on a little bit of a rant there, just to kind of, I think it's a really important point to make. We've got a few more things that have been asked here. In a setting where observation isn't an evidence category, will the assessor spend less time on site? That's a really good question, Angela. I'm going to jump in on that one, if that's okay, Anne. We know for a fact, having looked at a couple of the previous published reports, that on-site activity has still occurred in services that are deemed domiciliary or extra care. So even though there is no observation category, which means in theory, CQC never have to turn up to those services, it appears they still have. Now, whether that will change over time or whether it's because there's a recognition that there is still some value in observation, I think what's important to highlight is that it's going to be much more common that some quality statements may have very little or no observation visit. So I think we're probably still going to have CQC visits, even if you aren't in that observation space, but they're going to be even less powerful because during that observation visit, they're actually mainly going to be doing feedback and processes evidence. Or there'll be some quality statements where they don't actually require the observation at all, which is also, by the way, the place for residential. There are only 11 quality statements that actually have observation in place. We can talk about that another point. Interesting question here. Would you query the point of the entire inspection if they are not going to cover enough areas to affect the rating? Would be interesting to put the question to CQC as to how a provider is able to change their rating or whether their own processes include a minimum amount of criteria. Excellent question, Kelly. So CQC were pinned on this a few weeks ago. One of the Care Week events, someone basically had a go at them and basically said what you just said, Kelly. And again, poor James Bullion. I wouldn't say poor James Bullion. I think he's done very well for himself. But he was skewered on this, and his response was, we know that there's no current agreed amount of quality statements, and that needs to be fixed. So they recognise that actually the fact that, for example, Anne had 5, another service we know had 13, I believe the average is 8 or 9, that needs to be worked on. And actually, I would say in an ideal world, you want to have 10. You want to have about 10, and you want to do that ideally twice a year, because then over 2 years, you'll have covered all 34 and a bit. That would be my suggestion. You would do 10 quality statements per hit, 2 hits per year, over a 2-year period, all of those 34 plus a couple of extra reassessed would be done. If I were king of CQC, that is what I would do. Unfortunately, I'm not king of CQC, probably for good reasons. Brilliant. And I just want to give you one last chance. I'm aware that we've hit 1 o'clock, and I'm aware that other people have things going on. If people want, we can do something like this again next week or another time. You know, we can be more than happy to ask more questions around this. And if I could just ask one last question. Yeah. In terms of the process, did it feel different? And what felt different? And then the second part to that, you know, did you feel you were giving over lots of new evidence, or did it seem like actually this is the sort of stuff we used to share, it's just being done differently? What's your thoughts around how different it felt to the inspections of the past that you've had?
Right, okay, so I'll be honest, of course I was very nervous when I opened the door because I'd had the phone call with my inspector the day before, and it's hard to overcome that, but you do. But I felt it was a lot more relaxed. Yeah, it wasn't as judgy as inspections that I've had before. It was more, have you got this, show me that, how do you do things? But there was no, it wasn't as judgy as it was a lot more relaxed, and like I say, you didn't feel on the spot. If you didn't find something, you're not going to be in trouble for it, kind of thing. Or it wasn't like it used to be. If you
and I suppose, sorry, carry on.
No, so if you couldn't, we'll go into a panic. If you're looking for something on your matrix and you can't necessarily find it there and then, before it would be, oh, well, it can't be there then. You got the impression that he understood the nervousness and the fact that, you could find it, it'd be fine, kind of thing. Yeah, it was calmer, a lot calmer. And the fact that it was one person.
Yes, and I think there's 2 things about that. The fact is, it's, I'm sure there'll be some of the personality of that individual that will be part of that. But I think another really important thing is, could you imagine, some of the people on this call will have been CQC inspectors, and I can only imagine what it must be like to have to assess an entire service in 1 or 2 days. In the new framework, because they have that space to look at documentation separately. They have this assessment model where they're not doing the whole home in one hit. They're doing 5 or 7 or 9 or 12 or however many. They're not looking at everything all at once, and they've already got built into the process these extra days to collect evidence. That means that when a CQC inspector turns up, they've actually got space and time. They've got space and time to do this well, because they're not having to look at all of the framework, and they're not having to gather everything in this one day. Brilliant. And thank you so much, everyone. I'm aware that we've gone a few minutes past 1 o'clock, so I'm going to officially close the meeting. And I know everyone's muted, so I'll just give you a round of applause. Thank you very, very much for sharing your experiences. Thank you very, very much for being so honest and answering all of our weird, wonderful questions. Everyone else, do feel free to keep in contact, connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll be sharing more information around this. We've also got a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline to help you train your care staff. We've got our Care Staff Confidence, How to Speak to a CQC Inspector video program, which you can use to train your care staff to speak with CQC. Lots of exciting stuff coming up over the next few weeks. But with that, we'll leave it for now. Have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences. No worries. Thank you very much. And we'll hopefully see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.